we're diving headfirst into the political pressure cooker that is Taiwan in late 2025. I mean, right now, the legislative halls are just buzzing with these high-stakes battles over, well, everything. Defense spending, the hugely sensitive issue of civil servant pension cuts.
The stakes are immense.
They really are. And it feels like the electoral clock is already ticking, and loudly, toward the 2026 local elections. So this isn't a time for guesswork. We have this monumental stack of data from the Taiwan Public Opinion Foundation, the TPOF, their November 2025 national survey.
Yeah.
And it gives us a crystal clear snapshot of who is winning the public relations battle and, maybe more importantly, what the public fundamentally thinks of the political players.
That's exactly right. And this is probably one of the most comprehensive snapshots we've seen all year. Our mission today, as I see it, is really twofold.
Okay.
First, we need to precisely map public sentiment on the big legislative and policy debates that have just dominated this very tense autumn. You know, the referendums, the defense budget, those pension reforms.
Right, the big ticket items.
Yeah, exactly. And second, and this is really the absolute core of our deep dive today, we are going to execute a really systematic, unflinching study of how the Taiwanese public perceives the core image, the existing strengths, and maybe the most challenging structural flaws of the main opposition party, the Kuomintang, the KMT.
And the survey really went deep, didn't it? It asked about 8 specific traits of the KMT.
Well, very granular. That's why it's so valuable.
That granular detail is exactly what we need. So before we jump into what are, frankly, some explosive numbers, let's just quickly touch on the methodology. I mean, why should we and you listening trust these numbers?
Because the methodology is robust.
Yeah.
It's really designed to capture the modern Taiwanese political landscape with a high degree of accuracy. The survey was conducted over 3 days, November 10th through the 12th, 2025.
Okay, very recent.
Very. They polled 1,085 adults aged 20 and over, and they used a sophisticated dual-frame random sampling approach. They used a 70% landline component and a 30% cell phone component.
That 70-30 split is crucial, isn't it? I mean, why go to all that trouble of using 2 different frames?
Well, it's absolutely necessary if you want to avoid systematically missing key voter demographics. It's a known issue in polling.
Right.
Landlines, they tend to oversample older, more traditionally settled populations, people who are often more reliable voters and sometimes more conservative.
Okay, that makes sense.
But that 30% cell phone component is essential. It's how you capture the younger, more mobile, often more liberal-leaning voters who might not even have a landline at all.
So by balancing those two, you get a much more accurate picture of the whole country.
Precisely. TPOF carefully balances these 2 frames to ensure the results are representative across age, lifestyle, everything. And with a margin of error sitting at about plus or minus 2.98 percentage points at a 95% confidence level, we can be highly confident in the reliability of these insights.
All right, so the numbers are solid. Let's unpack this, starting with the political climate. What were the key events that were really influencing public opinion right before this poll dropped?
You have to look both inward and outward. Globally, one significant influence that the source noted was the recent Tuanxi meeting. That's the summit between former President Trump and President Xi.
Right. That was just before the poll.
It was. And that event was framed, at least in some media, as achieving a kind of temporary balance, especially on some thorny trade areas like rare earth metals and fentanyl controls.
And what was the effect of that on Taiwan? A sense of relief?
I think the general international community, and by extension Taiwan, just collectively breathed a slight sigh of relief. The source actually termed the moment a false alarm regarding immediate U.S.-China stability.
A false alarm.
Yeah. And that external calm, however temporary it might be, meant that domestic issues, the legislative battles, executive performance, they took center stage without the immediate panic of a major cross-strait flare-up dominating all the headlines.
And domestically, things were anything but calm. This autumn legislative season has been a crucible of controversy, driven in large part by the opposition parties.
Oh, absolutely. We saw these fierce legislative pushes by KMT and TTP majority in the legislature. They really focused on reversing key administration policies.
Like what?
Well, stopping the annual pension cuts for civil servants and teachers, for one, restoring the very popular policy of binding referendums to general elections, and, of course, fiercely contesting the 2026 central government budget, especially that massive defense spending increase. These were all direct legislative challenges to the ruling administration's priorities.
And all of this high-stakes maneuvering is happening because, as we said, the 2026 local elections are already on the horizon. The sources really stress that these policy decisions are being heavily filtered through the lens of maximizing local electoral gains.
Precisely. I mean, we are effectively in the pre-election season. Every single legislative victory or defeat is immediately translated into potential local campaign material.
Yeah, you can already see the ads being written.
Exactly. And that whole backdrop brings us to one of the most stunning findings right off the bat, this credit dilemma over the universal cash handout.
Ah, yes. The $10,000 new Taiwan dollar universal cash handout. Logically, you would think the ruling party, the one who navigated all the bureaucratic hurdles and actually distributed the money, should get the political capital.
You'd think so.
But the numbers tell a story of, well, political framing genius by the opposition.
They absolutely do. When the poll asked who the public credits for this major piece of fiscal policy, the results are, well, they're almost unbelievable from the administration's perspective.
Let's hear it.
Only 22.7% gave credit to the ruling DPP. Meanwhile, a whopping 37.5% credited the opposition parties. That's the KMT and the TPP combined.
Wait, hold on. The government did the hard work of distribution, yet the opposition gets the credit. How is a narrative like that even sustainable going forward?
Well, it speaks volumes about the opposition's ability to frame the public narrative. The opposition received credit 14.8 percentage points more often than the ruling party, despite the ruling party being the one to actually execute the policy.
That's a huge gap.
It is. The TPOF analysis actually describes this as an abnormal state and a very frustrating political reality for the governing party. The public perception, which is so often shaped by legislative headlines, it viewed the opposition as the critical pressure point.
The ones who forced their hand.
Exactly. The ones who forced the administration to deliver this money to the people. They successfully hijacked the political benefit of a policy they didn't even implement.
And this wasn't just a localized thing or a partisan anomaly, right? This credit differential was geographically and demographically widespread.
That's a crucial detail. It elevates this from just a minor political skirmish to a major systemic warning for the DPP. Nearly all age groups, with the sole exception of the 25 to 34-year-olds, they credited the opposition more highly.
And what about some of the key demographics?
Let's just look at the politically engaged 55 to 64 age group. In that group, 46% credited the opposition, compared to just 19% crediting the DPP. And what's more, all 7 geographical regions that were surveyed, from the north all the way to the deep south, showed a majority crediting the opposition more highly. This just reinforces the idea that frustration with the administration was widespread, which made it easy for the opposition to establish that narrative that they were the people's champions.
That cash handout credit dilemma really sets the stage perfectly for examining the specific legislative battlegrounds where the opposition majority has been pushing so hard. Let's start with that highly sensitive issue of civil servant and teacher pensions.
Okay, this is question 2 in the survey. And it deals with the proposal to stop the annual reduction of the income replacement ratio.
Right, and that's the core mechanism of the Tsai administration's multi-year pension reform. Maybe we should just quickly clarify for everyone listening what that means.
Sure. The income replacement ratio, it just dictates the percentage of their working income that retirees receive as a pension. The reform sought to gradually shrink that percentage year by year. So stopping the reduction means halting the pension cuts that these retirees have been absorbing.
And this is a huge issue for a very organized and very vocal constituency.
It's massive. And the public response here is complex. It shows some serious division, but it also confirms the opposition's momentum on this issue.
Okay, so the public is divided. The data says no clear social consensus, but the proposal to halt the cuts actually enjoys slightly more support.
It does, barely. It's 39.5% support for stopping the cuts, and 12.7% of those strongly support it, while 37.1% oppose it. That's a very narrow but politically significant 2.4-point lead for the opposition's legislative proposal.
And what's really fascinating here is the trend analysis. This narrow lead is described as a significant change from the past.
It really is. The source highlights that since December of 2024, support for halting the cuts has risen by 3.4 points, while opposition has dropped by 4.5 points.
So that suggests the Tsai government's original reform, which used to have stable majority support, is now actively losing ground.
It is. The opposition has successfully mobilized sentiment against these austerity measures. The TPOF analysis even posits that this entire reform might be about to come to an abrupt end and become history.
And that would be a huge victory for the opposition and a serious setback for anyone making fiscal stability arguments.
A massive victory.
So who is driving this momentum? We need to look at the demographics. Can't just be the affected parties, can it?
Well, the primary support base is the obvious one. 54% of military, civil service, and teachers support halting the cuts. That's a strong political mandate from that cohort.
Sure.
But the age split is also really intriguing. Support is surprisingly high among the young 45% in the 20 to 24 age group, who you typically view as being supportive of reforms that reduce long-term fiscal burdens.
That is strange. Why would they be for it?
They seem to be aligning with the opposition here. Perhaps it reflects a more general anti-incumbent sentiment, or maybe just a distrust of any government-led cuts, regardless of the target.
And the middle age group?
Meanwhile, the middle age group, 45 to 64, they remain more reserved. They're the ones who might theoretically benefit the most from long-term fiscal solvency, so they're a bit more cautious.
Okay, let's move to the second major policy battleground. This is restoring the link between referendums and general elections, the binding referendum to general election policy.
Right.
This one shows an overwhelming consensus, and it's all in favor of the opposition's legislative push.
This is a policy where the opposition has just completely captured the public imagination. I mean, we're talking about a landslide victory for their narrative in the court of public opinion.
So what are the numbers?
A full 58.0% of the public support restoring the link, with 20.2% strongly supporting it. That's versus only 28.4% who oppose it.
That is a massive 30-point lead for the opposition's proposal.
A 30-point lead.
That margin is extraordinary, especially for what is, at its heart, a technical procedural issue, and really confirms this is mainstream public opinion, which makes the DPP's opposition to it politically perilous.
It really does.
Yeah.
And support has been very stable, sitting at around 58% since 2022, while opposition has been steadily falling. The source explicitly states that the DPP is currently standing on the opposite side of mainstream public opinion on this very sensitive political issue.
And you can feel that. The public feels strongly that these procedural votes should be tied to major elections. Why? To ensure maximum turnout, maximum political relevance.
Of course.
So for the ruling party to fight this popular position so vehemently, it means they are accumulating a lot of political debt.
They are. And the demographic breakdown here is just as striking. It shows how broadly this policy appeals. It crosses partisan lines. It even reaches into the ruling party's own base.
So it's not just a blue camp issue.
Not at all. The support is virtually universal. Young people are exceptionally enthusiastic about it. 79% of 20 to 24-year-olds support restoring the link, and 75% of the 25 to 34 group support it.
So this shows the youth are not just interested in pension cuts. They want procedural mechanisms that maximize democratic participation.
Exactly. And even within the ruling party's natural base, a significant portion, 39% of DPP supporters, agree with the opposition's stance on this.
39%. That's a huge number from within your own party.
It is. The opposition has found an issue that just transcends the typical blue-green political divide, which is an enormous tactical advantage for them.
Okay, now let's pivot to defense spending. This is where national security concerns, driven by all those external pressures, might just override these domestic political squabbles. We're talking about the record-high 2026 defense budget. NT, $949.5 billion. That's 3.32% of GDP. I mean, that is a massive commitment.
It's a huge number.
And the KMT leadership, including their chair, Zhang Lun, has publicly voiced some very strong objections to it.
And yet, despite those high-profile objections from the opposition leadership, the public narrowly supports the massive spending increase. The finding is 49.4% support versus 39.7% opposition.
So support still leads by a solid 9.7 points.
It does.
That strongly suggests that nearly half the public accepts the necessity of increasing the defense burden. That's likely driven by, heightened threat perceptions from the CCP and that ongoing pressure from key allies, particularly the U.S., about Taiwan's own defense commitments.
It shows a pragmatic readiness from the public. However, if we dig into the party split, this issue is intensely polarized.
Okay, let's break that down.
A full 83% of DPP supporters approve of the budget. That demonstrates strong base cohesion on defense. But the opposition base is fiercely opposed. 67% of KMT supporters and 63% of TPP supporters disapprove.
So if you're a KMT supporter, you're very likely against this budget.
Overwhelmingly.
So if the KMT base is so opposed to this defense spending, how does the KMT leadership manage to satisfy them without completely alienating the neutral voters who clearly support a strong defense policy? I mean, it seems like a very difficult balancing act.
It is the ultimate political tightrope walk. The opposition has to critique the spending, maybe on grounds of transparency or efficiency, to satisfy their base, which traditionally favors dialogue over massive militarization.
Right.
But if they do that, they risk looking weak on national security to the general public, especially to those centrist and neutral voters who are clearly swinging towards support for higher defense spending.
So the Lai administration, for its part, has a pretty significant public base for this spending, primarily driven by the Green camp, and, crucially, a large segment of those neutral voters. That gives them the political high ground, even with the legislative challenges.
It does. They can frame it as a matter of national survival, and that resonates with a lot of people right now.
So the opposition is successfully framing the narrative on popular domestic policies, but the executive branch has the advantage on national security. Let's turn now to the executive branch itself. The sources paint this picture of ongoing, deep governing distress for President Lai Ching-te.
Yeah, that phrase, governing distress, is not hyperbole. It has persisted for 5 consecutive months, ever since August. The latest numbers show 37.9% approval, which is severely countered by 50.2% disapproval.
So that leaves a net disapproval gap of 12.3 points. That shows that despite any slight easing of tensions over the past month, the political damage remains profound.
It does. We do see a hint of a slow recovery, but it's still painful for them. Approval did rise 3 points from October, and disapproval fell about 2.3 points.
But the analysis is clear. This is just a slow recovery.
That's right. The president is still trapped in the negative territory of public opinion. And returning to pre-crisis levels is going to require what the TPOF source terms Herculean efforts. The damage was just too systemic.
And the sources identify one specific event as the single most important factor causing this persistent low rating. It's the lingering shadow of the Great Recall failure.
That is the pivotal moment. We really need to remember the context here. The Great Recall failure was the political fallout and the chaos surrounding the unsuccessful attempt to recall a major political figure.
Right. And it just severely damaged the overall political climate and caused systemic harm to the DPP's public image. It signaled an executive branch that was really struggling to manage major legislative and public crises.
And the consequence of that is this enduring public dissatisfaction that's incredibly difficult to shake off quickly.
Exactly, because it spoke to a perceived breakdown in political stability and executive competence.
And when we look at the support base for the president, the polarization is just extreme, suggesting he remains sort of trapped in his political echo chamber.
Oh, absolutely. 83% of DPP supporters approve, which is what you'd expect. He maintains his base. But the disapproval is overwhelming among the opposition base. 83% of KMT supporters and a massive 89% of TPP supporters disapprove.
89%.
And crucially, a majority of the key working age groups, those people between 20 and 64, they disapprove of his performance. His support is just so heavily reliant on his partisan base. 68% of his total approval comes directly from DPP supporters. And when 2/3 of your positive rating is coming from within your own party, you have failed to capture the center.
You've completely lost the middle ground.
So if the president is struggling, how is Premier Cho's cabinet faring? Does the cabinet suffer from the same recall failure hangover?
It does, although the severity has lessened just a little bit. The Cho cabinet also faces significant dissatisfaction. 39.7% of the public are satisfied with their performance, while 46.6% are dissatisfied.
So dissatisfaction still leads by 6.9 points.
It does. The gap did narrow by about 5.7 points compared to October, which suggests some of that explosive social dissatisfaction is starting to dissipate.
The immediate anger is cooling down, maybe?
Yes, but the distress is deeper. The cabinet has actually been in distress for even longer than the president, for 8 consecutive months since April of 2025. The executive branch as a whole is just struggling to appeal to that critical middle ground.
Which creates a vacuum that the opposition is only too happy to fill.
Of course. And the polarization mirrors the presidential numbers. 78% of DPP supporters are satisfied, but 76% of KMT and 73% of TPP supporters are dissatisfied. The middle ground is clearly unhappy with the current state of governance.
We've established that the executive branch is struggling to achieve consensus, but their struggles alone don't automatically lift the opposition. We need to know, what is the public actually buying when they look at the Kuomintang?
Right.
So let's turn now to the core deep dive on their fundamental image, starting with the two areas where they hold a distinct public advantage.
Okay, the TPOS study clearly identifies two long-standing powerful strengths for the KMT in the eyes of the Taiwanese people. And the primary one is their perceived focus on economic development.
This is Q12 from the survey. How large is this perceived advantage, and why has it become so entrenched in the public mind?
Well, it's their largest net positive finding by a pretty wide margin. 52.6% of respondents agree that the KMT is a party that focuses on economic development. That's compared to 38.9% who disagree.
So a net achievement lead of 13.5 points.
Exactly. And this is largely a legacy perception. It's tied to the KMT's role in driving Taiwan's economic miracle decades ago. The memory of strong economic growth and stability under previous KMT administrations, whether it's entirely accurate or not, it remains a major asset for them.
And is this perceived strength broadly accepted across the spectrum?
Yes, it's right across the board. This is a powerful, unifying narrative that spans all age groups and all 7 of the geographical regions surveyed.
And crucially, it appeals beyond their core base.
Very much so. 86% of KMT supporters and 67% of TPP supporters agree. But what's really important is that nearly half, 48% of neutral voters also agree.
That's the key number.
It is. For those voters who are focused primarily on prosperity, on their pocketbooks, the KMT remains the default choice. And this perception grants the KMT significant competitive leverage whenever they're debating budgets, trade, or financial policy.
Okay, so their second major strength, Q10, is maybe even more remarkable, especially given the KMT's history, their perceived emphasis on democratic values.
This is a monumental political victory for the party over the last 4 decades. It's really hard to overstate. 49.5% agree that the KMT values democracy, freedom, and human rights, compared to 43.6% who disagree. That gives them a net positive of 5.9 points here.
An authoritarian party being seen as valuing democracy. I mean, that requires a serious reflection on Taiwan's political evolution. How did they achieve this whitewashing, as the source calls it, of their authoritarian past?
Well, the TPOF source notes that nearly 4 decades after Taiwan's democratic transition, the KMT's historical stigma as an authoritarian party has been largely diluted or even whitewashed.
Yeah, how did that happen?
It happened because at the end of the day, the KMT participated in and helped facilitate the very democratic system it now seeks to lead. They're seen as abiding by democratic rules, running candidates, respecting electoral results. In the public eye, they have successfully pivoted from being the architects of martial law to being a legitimate, democracy-supporting opposition party.
And that structural acceptance is invaluable for them.
Oh, it's everything. It means they can compete fully without automatically being dismissed based on their history.
But is this view consistent across partisan lines? I have to imagine DPP voters are very skeptical.
Oh, they are deeply skeptical.
Yeah.
The polarization definitely exists here. 89% of KMT supporters agree they value democracy, and TPP supporters also agree pretty strongly at 65%. But 80% of DPP supporters disagree. They view the KMT's actions through a very different, very historical lens. Yet even with that strong partisan pushback, the KMT still maintains a net positive image on this overall, thanks to centrist and neutral voters. It's a huge institutional win that allows them to argue they are the ones protecting democratic processes, especially during these intense legislative fights.
So the KMT has these two clear strengths in economics and democratic legitimacy. But now we have to turn to the core of their political challenge, what the sources are calling their 3 major doors or fundamental hurdles that they have to overcome before they can seriously contemplate a return to the executive branch in 2028. Let's start with the largest negative perception, Q9, lack of anti-communist steadfastness. This number is genuinely shocking.
And this is the KMT's existential crisis, really, encapsulated in a single statistic. The data reflects what's called a high degree of social consensus, and it's against them.
Okay, lay it out for us.
Only 22.1% of people agree that the KMT is a party with a firm anti-communist stance. Meanwhile, a massive 67.1% disagree.
Wow.
That is a net disagreement margin of 45 points. It's their single most damaging perception.
A 45-point deficit on an issue that was historically their absolute ideological cornerstone against the CCP. I mean, this isn't just a political attack. It feels like a total failure of political branding and a fundamental crisis of trust in their security posture.
It speaks to the utter erosion of their historical identity. The perception now is that the KMT is too weak, too willing to compromise, or perhaps even too compromised by Beijing to be trusted with national defense and security. And this is particularly devastating in a society that is increasingly aware of the military threat posed by the CCP.
And the most disturbing revelation for the KMT leadership isn't the general public's opinion, but the internal party fracture this poll exposes.
That is the political time bomb waiting to go off. When we break down the KMT's own support base, we find that 48% of KMT supporters disagree that their party has a firm anti-communist stance.
Almost half their own voters?
Nearly half of their own loyal voters harbor deep, deep doubts about the party's core commitment in this critical area. I mean, if your own base doesn't even trust you on your historic mission, your vulnerability is total.
And that internal doubt must be constantly reinforced by the controversial actions and rhetoric of some high-profile party members. Can you give us an example of how this polling data is continually being reinforced in the news cycle?
We saw a perfect, if painful, example of this recently involving a KMT Central Standing Committee member, He Yinglu. Her public statements are essentially a live-action confirmation of this negative polling image.
What did she do?
Well, she appeared on a platform wearing a Mao Zedong shirt. She explicitly criticized former President Ma Ying-jeou as the most useless person. And then she made the inflammatory declaration, "I am a daughter of the People's Republic of China."
Wow. I mean, for the 48% of KMT voters who already doubt the party's anti-communist stance, and certainly for every single swing voter, this kind of action just confirms their worst fears.
It does. It confirms that the KMT harbors elements that are fundamentally opposed to Taiwan's democratic identity and security.
That specific anecdote really crystallizes why that minus 45-point deficit exists. Okay, moving to the second major hurdle, Q11, cleanliness and corruption. This is another area of overwhelming public consensus against the KMT.
Yes, it's the second largest area of negative consensus. The pollsters label it a basic consensus in Taiwanese society. Only 26.5% of people agree that the KMT is a clean party, while 64.5% disagree.
So a net disagreement of 38 points.
A huge number.
So a vast majority of the public overwhelmingly believes the party is not clean. And this is pervasive across all demographics. Why does this perception stick so relentlessly?
It speaks to decades of historical baggage. Baggage that was accumulated during long periods of single-party rule, which was often associated with opaque financial dealings, and the perception of powerful elites prioritizing their own self-interest.
And it hasn't gone away.
Not at all. The majority disagreement here is consistent across all age groups and all educational levels surveyed. This is a very deep-seated structural image problem that the party can't just dismiss as mere partisan attacks. It suggests a fundamental societal belief that the KMT is fundamentally tied to money and historical power structures, which makes it very difficult for the average citizen to trust its integrity.
All right, finally, the third major hurdle, Q8, revolves around identity. China identity versus Taiwan identity. This is the third door they have to overcome.
And this is a crucial challenge because it hits at the very heart of modern Taiwanese self-identification. A clear majority, 50.3%, agree that the KMT identifies with China more than Taiwan. Only 39.4% disagree.
So agreement leads by 10.9 points.
It does.
And if the identity trend in Taiwan shows, over 75% of the population holding a strong Taiwanese identity, then the KMT is perceived as being oriented toward a minority identity in a rapidly consolidating nation. I mean, what does that mean for their long-term viability?
It's a political nightmare for them. The source states this perception is absolutely not good news. The KMT is basically fighting against the current of national identity consolidation.
It's a losing battle.
Well, while the identity issue might not produce the massive deficits we see in anti-communism or cleanliness, it creates a fundamental disconnect. They are perceived as being out of step with the nation's sense of self. And this perception holds a majority view across nearly all age groups and all 7 geographical regions. The KMT's challenge is figuring out how to appeal to this 75% plus Taiwanese identified majority without completely alienating their own traditional core, which often views itself through a broader, sometimes pan-Chinese historical lens. They need a new identity narrative that feels authentic to modern Taiwan.
So we have the 2 strengths, economy and democracy, and the 3 crippling hurdles, anti-communism, cleanliness, and identity. Now we need to examine the remaining 3 metrics where the KMT falls short and needs substantial effort to avoid structural failure. Let's start with Q14, governing ability.
This is a finding that's full of political nuance. It's not that the public believes the KMT is completely incapable of governance. It's that they don't view them as the most capable option for national leadership.
Okay, so what are the numbers?
36.5% agree the KMT is the most capable governing party, but 55.2% disagree. So disagreement leads by a substantial 18.7 points.
So they might have demonstrated some regional or legislative competence, but nationally they just don't hold that top-tier ready-to-govern status, and this weakness contrasts with their perceived economic focus, which is interesting.
Precisely. The subtle message here is that while they possess some capability, they are decidedly not the best option for national governance in the public eye. This weakness suggests that their economic ideas might be appreciated, but their operational execution at the highest, most complex level is doubted. And this lack of faith in national governing ability is a huge barrier for any party hoping to win the presidency in 2028.
Next up, let's look at Q13. Representing the common people. This speaks directly to their class appeal and their public image as an establishment party.
And here, a majority believes the KMT fails to genuinely represent the interests of the common person. 53.3% disagree that the KMT represents the interests of the common people versus only 38.7% who agree.
So that disagreement leads by 14.6 points.
It does.
It sounds like the KMT is still viewed through that historical lens of a party tied to specific vested interests, maybe big business, older elites, or bureaucratic power, rather than the average citizen who's struggling with inflation or housing costs.
That's exactly the interpretation from the source. The public perception is that the KMT might represent certain interests, but it will not be the interests of the common people. This perception, combined with the cleanliness and corruption issues we talked about, it just paints a picture of a party that's disconnected from everyday socioeconomic struggles. It reinforces an image of elitism that really limits their appeal to the working class and to younger voters.
Finally, Q15, trustworthiness. This feels like the ultimate synthesis of all their negative traits.
Trust is fundamental to political success, and here the KMT also struggles profoundly. Over half the country, 52.3%, views the KMT as untrustworthy. They disagree that it's a trustworthy party. Only 38.7% agree.
So the net disagreement stands at 13.6 points.
It does. And it's logically consistent. I mean, if the public doubts their anti-communist stance, views them as unclean, and questions who they truly represent, trustworthiness is going to suffer as a natural result.
It's the inevitable consequence of those three major hurdles we discussed.
Absolutely. You simply cannot win a national presidential election in 2028 with over half the country viewing your party as fundamentally untrustworthy. Overcoming this deficit requires fixing the core structural flaws that feed it, namely, the perception of being soft on Beijing and being tied to corruption.
Let's shift now from that deep image analysis to the concrete political support figures. After all these policy battles and executive difficulties, how did the overall party support figures stack up in November 2025?
Okay, the latest TPOF poll shows the ruling DPP remains the largest party, but their lead is shrinking and shrinking significantly. The DPP stands at 31.1%, which is down 1.8 points from October.
And the KMT?
The KMT saw a substantial surge. They've risen to 25.8%, which is an increase of 3.9 points in just 1 month.
Wow. And the TPP?
The TPP remains relatively stable at 14.7%. That's a modest increase of just 0.3 points.
That KMT jump of almost 4 points in a single month is politically dramatic. But I think the most important metric right now has to be the aggregate opposition strength, the combined blue-white support totals.
The aggregate is absolutely crucial. The combined support for the two main opposition parties, the KMT and the TPP, it totals 40.5%. And this aggregate exceeds the ruling DPP by a substantial 9.4 points.
So 40.5% of the country is aligning with the opposition at this moment.
That's right.
And that is described as a serious warning for the ruling party heading toward the 2026 local elections, especially considering the DPP's historical dominance.
It fundamentally changes the political dynamics. I mean, historically, the DPP was often able to easily handle both opposition parties by dividing them. But with this blue-white aggregate holding strong above 40%, the combined opposition presents a much more united and powerful front.
And that makes the political terrain for the upcoming electoral cycle far more challenging for the Green camp.
Much more challenging.
Let's focus on that KMT 3.9-point jump. This rise occurred despite some ongoing controversies, notably those surrounding their new party chair, Zhang Luan, which you'd think should have been a drag on their support. So how did they achieve this increase?
This is a classic case of successful tactical maneuvering offsetting structural problems. The source attributes this short-term surge primarily to the direct link between their legislative actions and the public credit they received.
So, three-factor.
Exactly. They benefited significantly from three factors. First, the public credit they received for advocating that popular $10,000 cash handout. Second, their legislative push for halting the civil servant and teacher pension cuts, which mobilized a strong vocal constituency. And third, their highly popular push to restore the binding referendum to general election policy, which, as we saw, enjoys massive public consensus.
So specific popular legislative actions seem to have successfully overridden the negative fallout from internal image controversies, at least in the short term. They made themselves relevant on issues the public cared about right now.
Precisely. They have successfully channeled the general dissatisfaction with the executive branch into specific support for their party via these policy successes. And in doing so, they've managed to temporarily sideline the negative public relations created by their internal party issues.
And what about the TPP? Their support is stable around 14%, which really cements them as a crucial third force.
Yeah, the TPP is remarkably stable. They're maintaining a strong following right around that 14% mark. And this resilience is attributed to the strength of its committed Xiaocao, or little grass support base, their loyal grassroots following, often younger and very anti-establishment.
But they have a major test coming.
They have a massive looming hurdle that could mark a historical turning point for the party. And that is the expected trial verdict within the next 4 months concerning the Koenji Jinghua City case. That legal outcome is going to severely test the resilience of the TPP's support and their ability to maintain that vital 14% block.
This has been a deeply insightful look into Taiwan's current political moment. We've covered massive public consensus on key policy mechanisms, a government stuck in debilitating distress, and most importantly, a really detailed breakdown of the KMT's complex public image.
And to summarize that KMT image, based on the TPUF's conclusion, the data really presents a clear trade-off. They possess two genuine strengths.
Right.
A strong focus on economic development, which is their largest net positive at plus 13.7 points net agreement. And they are generally perceived as valuing democratic values, a massive historical accomplishment that results in a net agreement of plus 5.9 points.
But those strengths are countered by these immense liabilities, the three fundamental doors or major hurdles that the party simply cannot ignore if they have any wish to regain power.
And those hurdles are crippling because they are so deeply structural. First, the lack of anti-communist steadfastness, registering a shocking net disagreement of minus 45.0 points. Second, the issue of cleanliness and corruption, with a net disagreement of minus 38.0 points. And third, the perception that they identify with China more than Taiwan, a net disagreement of minus 10.9 points. These are the three core structural problems that fundamentally define the party's ceiling.
And their three secondary weaknesses: governing ability at minus 18.7, trustworthiness at minus 13.6, and representing the common people at minus 14.6, they're all direct consequences of those three major hurdles.
Which brings us to the biggest question for you, the listener, as we look ahead to Taiwan's next major national race in 2028. The KMT has just experienced a significant short-term rise in party support.
Right.
And it's directly attributable to the popularity of specific tactical legislative policy pushes. They gained 3.9 points by aligning with public frustration on the cash handout, on pensions, and on referendums.
But these are transient policy wins. They can fade quickly, or the DPP could simply reverse course and claim those popular positions for themselves. Can this short-term tactical momentum provide enough energy to overcome the deep, fundamental, and historically ingrained image problems?
That is the KMT's dilemma. The analyst Wang Weihan explicitly linked these severe image deficits, especially the lack of anti-communist steadfastness and the cleanliness issue, directly to the viability of the KMT regaining power in the 2028 presidential election. These core image weaknesses are remarkably stable over time. They resist short-term political maneuvering.
So what's the takeaway?
The KMT's largest, most difficult task is figuring out how to fundamentally transform these long-term image problems. Because without that transformation, those short-term policy victories will simply not be enough to carry them across the finish line.
And that leaves us with a provocative thought. Consider how quickly public consensus on policy, like the defense budget or the referendum link, can shift depending on external events, versus how long-term party image struggles, like that stunning anti-communism metric, show such painful stability over decades. Thank you for guiding us through this immense volume of data today.